In my last life, I was a director in state government, a guy who'd climbed his way up from the ground floor. I'd seen it all. The backroom deals, the high-stakes poker games, the honey traps. You name the political game, I'd played it and won. I never expected my next life would be a reincarnation as the long-lost, true-born son of a billionaire family, missing for 18 years. My first day back in the fold was, of course, the fake son's birthday party. There I was in my faded, worn-out jeans, cornered by them like a perp in an interrogation room. My own mother pinched her nose. If I had known you were so utterly unpresentable, I never would have agreed to bring you back. You're staining the floor. My brother eyed me coldly. We only have one brother in this family, and that's Julian. You'd better learn your place and not get any ideas. And the fake son, Julian, dressed in a custom-tailored tuxedo, spoke with tears welling in his eyes. Ethan, don't blame Mom and Dad. They're just not used to this, he stammered. Maybe you could start by apologizing to me. You scare my friends. I had to laugh. I picked up a glass of red wine from a nearby table. In my past life, we called this a compliance test. In this life, it's just called hazing the new guy. I looked at this family, this dysfunctional, disorganized, and undisciplined amateur hour operation with no clear chain of command. Perfect. This team is a mess. I'll have to manage them myself. Objective. Model unit of the year. 1. I swirled the dark red liquid in the glass, my gaze shifting past them to a nervous-looking waiter hovering nearby. You come here. The waiter froze, pointing at his own chest in disbelief. I nodded. He hurried over, bowing anxiously. I handed him the wine glass and pointed to a small puddle on the floor, spilled when one of Julian's friends had jostled me earlier. Clean this up. Furthermore, I said, turning to my biological mother, the elegant and expensively maintained woman. According to standard event protocols, a stained carpet should be replaced immediately, or guests should be redirected to a secondary reception area. Allowing a spill to compromise the aesthetic integrity of the event is a dereliction of your duties as hostess. My mother's perfectly painted face began to twitch, her lips tightening. You. I ignored her and turned to my so-called brother, Ethan Sterling. Your responsibility is to protect members of this household. A moment ago, this young woman, I gestured to a garishly dressed girl next to Julian, verbally assaulted me. As the elder brother, your failure to intervene was also a dereliction of duty. Ethan's face went black as thunder. Finally, my eyes landed on Julian's tear-streaked face. As the guest of honor, your primary objective is to entertain your guests, not to manufacture internal conflict and undermine family unity. Inciting guests to pressure a member of your own family. That's just a poor operational tactic. I paused, then delivered my final assessment in a calm, even tone. All 3 key personnel derelict in their duties. The overall management of this birthday party is rated unsatisfactory. The corner fell into a dead silence. Julian's tears clung to his eyelashes, forgotten. My mother was trembling with rage, the finger she pointed at me shaking uncontrollably. Ethan ground his teeth. Who the hell do you think you are? He hissed. I'm Jacob Sterling, I said, stating my name. As of today, I am assuming the role of the true-born son of this family. I look forward to working with all of you. Without another glance at them, I walked through the crowd toward the buffet. I picked up a plate and served myself a slice of what looked like a decent Black Forest cake. Behind me, the stunned silence erupted into a storm of hushed, chaotic whispers. I'd barely taken 2 bites when a tall, imposing middle-aged man walked up to me. He wore a dark, bespoke suit and had the same browline as Ethan, but his eyes were deeper, carrying the unmistakable authority of someone long accustomed to being in charge. This was the CEO of this family operation, my biological father, Robert Sterling. He didn't speak at first, just sized me up, his eyes scanning me from head to toe. I calmly swallowed my cake and met his gaze. Can I help you? He finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. You're Jacob. I am. I heard what happened, he said, his brow furrowed. Your first day home, and you're already raising hell. Do you think that's appropriate? I dabbed my mouth with a napkin. Dad, I said, trying out the word. His expression flickered. This wasn't raising hell. This was a new hire orientation combined with a necessary course correction. This entire organization of yours is rotten from the foundation up. If you don't restructure, you're headed for a catastrophic failure. 2. Robert Sterling's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He had probably never been spoken to like that in his entire life. Certainly not by a son he just pulled out of some backwater town. His face hardened, and the pressure in the air around him dropped. Rules are meant to solve problems, not create them, I said, setting down my plate. Your rules have resulted in an organization with no clear roles and no distinction between insiders and outsiders. Do you consider those good rules? I gestured toward Julian, who was still sniffling in the corner. An external actor with no biological ties to this family is permitted to freely manipulate household resources and instigate conflict. And you, as the top man, have chosen to enable and ignore it. Dad, in my old line of work, we had a term for that. Occupying the corner office without delivering results. Robert's jaw twitched. He looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked toward the ballroom exit. Where are you going? He called out, his voice thick with suppressed fury. To my room, I said without looking back. I have no intention of wasting any more time on this inefficient and chaotic social engagement. A wave of gasps followed me out. I could feel dozens of eyes on my back like searchlights. I found a small room they had hastily prepared for me, shut the door, and locked out the noise. The first step in turning this amateur hour operation around was to understand its organizational structure and asset allocation. I fired up the old, clunky desktop in the corner and started Googling the Sterling Corporation. The next morning, I was woken by a sharp knock. It was the housekeeper. She informed me with a stern face that my mother had declared that since I was so fond of rules, I would now follow the Sterling family rules. I was not to leave my room without permission. 3 meals a day would be brought to me. So, they were putting me on lockdown. I nodded to show I understood. After she left, I looked at the breakfast she'd delivered. A single slice of dry toast and a cup of weak, watery coffee. Resorting to discriminatory resource allocation. Classic. I ate it slowly and methodically, then turned my attention back to the old computer. The family Wi-Fi had no restrictions. In a single day, I downloaded and analyzed the Sterling Corporation's last 5 years of public financial statements, along with every news article, interview, and personnel change I could find. By afternoon, I had a solid grasp of the organization's current status. The Sterling Corporation's primary business was in traditional real estate. It had been hit hard by market shifts and had been attempting to pivot, but every effort had failed. Its internal management was a disaster, rife with nepotism. Several key positions were held by my mother's relatives. Robert Sterling was a man of vision, but he was autocratic and refused to listen to advice. Ethan Sterling, currently a vice president, was arrogant and incompetent. The few projects he'd managed had all been spectacular failures. And then there was Julian, the fake son. He was a piece of work. He held 5% of the company's non-voting shares, netting him millions a year in dividends. Not only that, but he had also founded a personal studio that was registered as a subsidiary of the Sterling Corporation. It exclusively handled the company's marketing and design contracts, at prices far exceeding the market rate. A classic shell game. He was easily siphoning tens of millions from the company every year. I looked at the gaudy, amateurish marketing posters his studio had produced. I had to smile. They weren't raising a son. They were feeding a giant, parasitic tapeworm. 3. On the third day, my house arrest was lifted. It was my grandmother's birthday, and the entire family was expected at the main estate for dinner. My mother had the housekeeper deliver a suit for me. It was a drab, charcoal gray thing, with a cut that was at least a decade out of style. It looked like it had been pulled from the back of a closet. Meanwhile, Julian was downstairs waiting, dressed in a sharp, tailored white suit, his hair professionally styled. When he saw me coming down the stairs, a flash of smug satisfaction crossed his face before he replaced it with his usual look of innocent vulnerability. "Jacob, please don't be upset. We couldn't find anything that fit you on such short notice. This suit is a little old, but it's a good brand." I just looked at him, saying nothing. My silent stare made him squirm, and he quickly looked away. When we arrived at the estate, the whole clan was there. My grandmother, the family matriarch, sat at the head of the table, exuding a quiet authority. She gave me a cursory glance, then immediately pulled Julian over, beaming, and had him sit beside her. "Oh, Julian, You get more handsome every day. At the dinner table, everyone fawned over Julian, the atmosphere thick with laughter and praise. I was placed at the far end of the table, completely ignored. I felt like the unpaid intern in a board meeting, the one who's only there to pour coffee. Halfway through the meal, Julian suddenly cried out, "Oh!" His spoon clattered to the floor, splashing soup all over his pristine white suit. His eyes immediately turned red as he looked at me, his lip trembling. "Jacob, why did you just bump me?" Instantly, every eye at the table swiveled to me. I was in the middle of methodically eating a pork rib. Hearing him, I put my chopsticks down and looked up. "I bumped you." "Yes, he did." One of our cousins immediately chimed in. "I saw it." Jacob just stuck his arm out and knocked into Julian. My mother's face hardened. "Jacob," she snapped, "have you no manners at all? How dare you act like this in front of your grandmother?" Ethan slammed his hand on the table. "Apologize." I ignored them and looked to the head of the table at my grandmother. The matriarch was frowning, clearly displeased with me. "Grandma," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise and silenced the room. "You are the chief disciplinary officer of this family. Right now, at your birthday dinner, an individual has deliberately falsified evidence to frame another family member. Are you going to handle this or not?" Her expression changed. "What did you just say?" I said. I began, standing up and walking over to Julian, that he spilled the soup on himself. I pointed to the stain on his shirt. The soup flowed from top to bottom. If I had bumped his arm, the spoon would have flown outward, and the soup would have splashed on his front and his side. But as you can see, the stain runs in a straight line from his chest down to his thigh. This indicates that his hand slipped, or that he deliberately angled the spoon toward himself and then let go. I picked up a serving spoon from the table and did a quick demonstration. The laws of physics do not lie. The color drained from Julian's face. He was white as a sheet. The entire table was stunned, its occupants exchanging confused glances. I turned my attention to the cousin who had provided the false testimony. "As a witness, you provided a false statement to mislead a superior. In my book, that's called being disloyal and dishonest." The cousin's face turned a shade of mottled purple. Finally, I returned to my grandmother and gave a slight bow. When ethical violations occur within the family, you, as the senior leader, have a duty of oversight and management. I recommend that Julian here be given a severe, formal reprimand. I recommend that the individual who committed perjury be given a verbal warning. As for me, I said with a small smile, I have been unjustly accused, which has caused me significant emotional distress. I demand a public apology from Julian, as well as financial compensation for damages. Nothing too extreme. The retail price of his suit should cover it. Someone at the other end of the table choked on their soup, unable to stifle a snort. The matriarch's birthday dinner ended on a sour note. Grandma called Julian into her study and chewed him out behind closed doors. When he emerged, his eyes were swollen like walnuts. He didn't pay me, but he did apologize in front of the entire family, spitting the words out through clenched teeth. It was my first tactical victory since joining this family. The ride home was suffocatingly quiet. My mother and Ethan sat on either side of me like stone gargoyles, their faces darker than the night sky outside. Robert sat in the passenger seat, silent, but I could see his tightly knotted brow in the rearview mirror. Halfway home, my mother finally broke. "Jacob, what is it you're trying to do?" she asked, her voice shrill. "Are you determined to tear this family apart?" "I'm trying to help you," I replied calmly. "Help me?" She laughed as if it were the funniest joke she'd ever heard. "You've thoroughly humiliated me, and you call that helping? As the person directly responsible for internal family affairs, you lack even basic personnel assessment skills. Julian has been manipulating you right under your nose. Yet not only have you failed to notice, you've endorsed his behavior at every turn. If this continues, what will happen to your managerial authority? Who in this family will respect your leadership? What I did today was help you secure your command." My little speech left her speechless. Her chest heaved, and, after a long moment, all she could manage was, "You're just twisting words." "Facts speak for themselves," I said, leaning back and closing my eyes. "You can take your time to think it over." For the next few days, the house was quiet. Julian started actively avoiding me. The look in my mother's eyes when she saw me had shifted from pure disgust to something more complicated. I used this period of calm to launch the second phase of my family culture rectification plan, establishing a formal code of conduct. I spent one evening drafting a document titled Sterling Family Code of Conduct and Performance Review Policy, Draft. It detailed the rights, obligations, and responsibilities of each family member, as well as rewards and punishments for various behaviors. For example, any individual found to be sowing discord or creating family conflict will have their monthly allowance reduced by 50% and will be required to submit a written self-assessment of no less than 1,000 words. Any individual who makes an outstanding contribution to the family will be eligible for the Family Contribution Award, accompanied by a material bonus. The next morning at breakfast, I placed a printed copy of the draft in front of each person's plate. This is a draft of a new family code of conduct I prepared. Please review it and provide your feedback. Ethan didn't even look at it. He crumpled the paper into a ball and threw it on the floor. Are you insane? My mother picked up her copy, read the title, and her hands started to shake with rage. Jacob, who do you think you are? Julia, meanwhile, just looked timid. Jacob, we're family. Do we really need to be so formal? Only Robert picked up the document. He read it carefully from beginning to end. His expression shifted from initial contempt to thoughtful concentration, and finally, to something resembling deep consideration. For a full 10 minutes, the dining room was silent. At last, he put the document down and looked at me, his eyes sharp and analytical. What did you do for a living before this? I smiled, about to answer. Dad, Julian suddenly shrieked, his voice filled with panic and terror. Something's happened. It's bad. He held up his phone. A breaking news alert from the Wall Street Journal was on the screen. Croft Enterprises has just announced they're terminating their partnership with our company, the Westgate Initiative. It's dead. The words hit the room like a bomb. Robert's face went pale. He shot to his feet, swaying for a moment as if he might fall. The Westgate Initiative was the key to Sterling Corporation's pivot away from failing real estate. It was the project he had poured his heart and soul into for years. My mother and Ethan were in shock. How could this happen? The deal was practically signed. Julian's eyes, full of tears, darted toward me, his gaze laced with venom. It was you. It has to be you, he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. Dad, someone from the Croft family met with him yesterday. He must have said something to them. He sabotaged the project. Isabel Croft despises this kind of family drama. He must have gone to her and tattled. In an instant, I was the enemy. Robert's eyes were bloodshot as he stared at me, a look so intense it felt like he wanted to tear me apart with his bare hands. Was it you? He growled, the words forced from between his teeth. I looked at this room full of panicked, incompetent people. The moment a crisis hits, their first instinct isn't to solve the problem, but to deflect and find a scapegoat. Utterly rotten. I met Robert's gaze without flinching. Dad, before we start assigning blame, don't you think we should first ascertain what the problem actually is? You dare talk back? Ethan roared, lunging at me and grabbing the collar of my shirt. I'm going to kill you, you damn jinx. A hand shot out, fast as lightning, and clamped down on his wrist. I applied a little pressure. Art. Ethan cried out in pain as his arm went limp. I pushed him away and straightened my collar. Starting with torture before the internal review has even begun. I looked at him coldly. Mr. Vice President, your professional conduct is severely lacking. Then I turned back to the ashen-faced Robert. Give me 30 minutes. I'll find out why the project was killed. And if you can't, Robert's voice was ice. If I can't, I paused. I'll walk out of here with nothing but the clothes on my back and never have anything to do with the Sterling family again. The atmosphere in Robert Sterling's home office was thick enough to choke on. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, chain-smoking cigars. My mother and Ethan stood nearby, looking like furious sentinels. Julian was curled up on a sofa in the corner, his shoulders shaking with sobs, though he kept darting triumphant glances in my direction. I ignored the high-pressure interrogation they were trying to stage, walked straight to the desk, and opened Robert's laptop. Dad, I need the contact information for your lead at Croft Enterprises. Robert didn't answer right away. He just stared at me with extreme suspicion. What are you planning to do? Communicate directly with the person in charge on their side to get a clear picture of the situation, I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I pulled up the Westgate Initiative files. It's the most efficient way to solve a problem. Or has your standard procedure been to just guess? Ethan sneered. Who do you think you are? You think Isabel Croft is just going to take a meeting with you? Isabel Croft, the young, formidable CEO of Croft Enterprises, a nearly mythical figure in New York's business world. Not someone you just call up. I don't need to meet with her, I said without looking up. I just need her assistant's number. Robert was silent for a moment before finally rattling off a phone number. I dialed it immediately. The phone rang for a long time before a polite, detached male voice answered. I put it on speaker. Isabel Croft's office. Hello, this is Jacob Sterling from the Sterling Corporation. I'm calling to inquire about the specific reason for the termination of our partnership on the Westgate Initiative. The voice on the other end paused, clearly surprised. I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling, but that was Ms. Croft's final decision. We are not at liberty to disclose the reason. A typical boilerplate response. I'm not asking for trade secrets, I said calmly. However, any partnership termination should be based on a reason. Was there an issue with our proposal? Was our offer not competitive? Or perhaps, was there a misstep by our personnel during negotiations? We require a clear answer to conduct an internal review and implement corrective actions. It's also a matter of basic professional respect for the time and effort both parties have invested. My words were measured and reasonable, stating our position while also showing deference. The line went silent. After a full 30 seconds, the assistant spoke again, his tone slightly softer. Mr. Sterling, since you put it that way, I can give you a hint. The issue may have been with the final version of the proposal you submitted. The final proposal? Robert shot up in his chair, stunned. What was wrong with it? I personally approved that document before Ethan sent it. Ethan looked just as baffled. That's right. I sent exactly what you gave me. I didn't change a word. The assistant cleared his throat. The proposal itself, the data, and the planning were impeccable. However, there was something inappropriate included in the appendix. What was it? I pressed. Detailed dossier of negative information on one of your main competitors, Apex Realty. The contents were exhaustive. A dead silence fell over the office. Robert's face went from white to red, then to a sickly shade of green. Slipping opposition research into a formal business proposal, it wasn't just a dirty tactic. It was treating Croft Enterprises like fools, as if a file of dirt would sway their business judgment. It was a direct insult to Isabel Croft's intelligence. The Croft family was known for its integrity and loathed underhanded maneuvers. Of course the deal was dead. Who did this? Robert slammed his fist on the desk, a vein pulsing in his forehead. His eyes, sharp as daggers, shot to Ethan. It wasn't me. Dad, I swear it wasn't me. Ethan was terrified, waving his hands frantically. I just sent the file you gave me. Do you still have the file? I asked. Yes. It's on my laptop. Open it. Ethan scrambled to get his laptop and, in front of everyone, opened the compressed file he had emailed to Croft's assistant. The main proposal was perfect, but at the very end of the file list, there it was, a folder titled Appendix. He clicked it open. Inside was a PDF document, dozens of pages long, with the title, Apex Realty, Internal Risk Assessment and Executive Compromat. All the blood drained from Ethan's face. How? I don't know. I really don't know how that got there. You don't know? Robert was shaking with fury, pointing at him. You sent a file this important without even checking it first. Ethan was speechless. I watched this pathetic scene unfold, my gaze drifting to the corner where Julian was still crying, his sobs growing louder. His body was trembling, as if he were terrified. But I knew it wasn't fear. It was exhilaration. Now is not the time to be assigning blame for operational errors, I said, closing the laptop and cutting off Robert's tirade. The immediate priority is damage control. Damage control? Ethan looked at me as if I were a lifeline. How? Croft has made their position clear. Positions can be changed, I said, turning to Robert. Dad, what's needed now is for you to issue a formal apology to Isabel Croft. Apologize? Robert's face was a mask of fury. I'm Robert Sterling. I don't bow to anyone. This isn't bowing. This is crisis management. It's about taking accountability for our own failures. I spoke each word clearly. As the head of the organization, when a major operational failure like this occurs, shouldn't you be the first to step up and accept leadership responsibility? Operational failure. Robert's jaw twitched again. After the apology, step 2 is a full internal investigation. We find the saboteur who planted that file. My eyes casually swept over Julian. His crying hitched, and his body went rigid. Step 3, we prepare a new, more compelling proposal and resubmit it to Croft Enterprises. That's impossible, Ethan said, defeated. They won't give us a second chance. Chances are earned, not given, I said, pulling out my phone and dialing a number. Perhaps we can find an intermediary. It was the number of an older gentleman who'd taken a liking to me at a business dinner once. He played poker with Isabel Croft. In my past life, networking like this was second nature. Robert stared at me, his expression a maelstrom of shock, doubt, and a tiny sliver of hope. Fine, he finally ground out. I'll give you 3 days. If there's no progress in 3 days, you get the hell out of my house. With his authorization, I moved immediately. First, I drafted a sincere and carefully worded letter of apology under Robert's name and sent it to Isabel Croft's assistant. In it, I attributed the entire incident to an internal management oversight and a procedural error by a junior employee, and stated that the Sterling Corporation would be undergoing a serious internal review. Next, I contacted my poker-playing acquaintance and asked if he could help arrange a brief meeting with Isabel. Only after I had set these things in motion did I turn to the issue of the saboteur. I had Ethan email me the compromised file from his laptop. I'd spent time in an IT security division in my past life. This was familiar territory. It didn't take long to pull up the file's metadata and review its creation and modification history. The file was created by an unfamiliar username. But the last modification, the one that added the appendix folder, was made just 5 minutes before Ethan sent the email. And the IP address that accessed the computer was registered to our home. At that time, the only people in the house were the 4 of us and the staff. Robert and my mother wouldn't do something like this. Ethan, for all his incompetence, wouldn't sabotage his own father's passion project. He lacked both the motive and the guts. That left only one possible answer. I compiled my findings into a simple, 1-page report and placed it on Robert's desk. He stared at the report, at the timestamp of the last modification, and at the IP address of the Sterling family mansion. His face grew dark and terrible. Julian, he whispered the name, his voice filled with a disbelief that bordered on anguish. Just then, there was a soft knock on the study door. Julian walked in carrying a cup of tea, his face still streaked with tears, the picture of innocence. Dad, please don't be angry anymore. It's not worth hurting your health. It was my fault. I shouldn't have suspected Jacob. His words died in his throat when he saw the report on Robert's desk. His eyes widened in horror, and every last trace of color drained from his face. What is that? Julian's voice trembled. Robert didn't speak. He simply pushed the report across the desk toward him. Julian stared at the clearly marked time and IP address, and he swayed on his feet. No, it wasn't me. He shook his head violently, tears now streaming down his face. Dad, it really wasn't me. Why would I do that? The Westgate Initiative is so important to our family. Yes, Robert's voice was dangerously quiet. Why would you do that? Julian dropped to his knees with a thud, grabbing Robert's legs and sobbing hysterically. Dad, you have to believe me. Someone framed me. It was Jacob. It had to be him. He suddenly pointed at me. He knows computers. He faked all of this to get me kicked out of the family. I stood off to the side, watching his performance with cold detachment. Even now, cornered, his first instinct was to attack. His skills were, admittedly, impressive. I framed you. I let out a short laugh. I've been back for less than a week. I don't even know your laptop password. How could I possibly frame you? Besides, what's my motive? What do I gain by destroying the Westgate project? It's not like I'm the one with company shares in my name, waiting for a multi-million-dollar dividend every year. My words were a poisoned dart, hitting him right where it hurt. Julian's sobs hitched. Robert's gaze sharpened. I'm going to give you one last chance, he said, looking down at Julian, his voice deadly serious. Tell me the truth. Julian flinched, a a look of utter desperation in his eyes. He knew it was over. I didn't mean to. He finally broke down. It was Mr. Davison from Apex Realty. He came to me. Apex Realty, the Sterling Corporation's mortal enemy. He promised me that if I helped him kill the Westgate deal, he would give me 3% of Apex's corporate stock. 3% of the stock. Everyone in the room drew a sharp breath. Apex was a much larger company than Sterling. 3% was worth hundreds of millions. For money, he had betrayed the family that had raised him for 18 years. Robert closed his eyes, his face a mask of pain and disappointment. My mother covered her mouth, staring in disbelief at the boy she had cherished and protected his entire life. Ethan's eyes were blazing red. He pointed at Julian, so furious he couldn't even form words. You ungrateful snake. I'm not. Julian shrieked, scrambling to his feet. He wiped his tears, his expression twisting into something wild and defiant. I was never your son to begin with. My last name is Vance, not Sterling. My mother told me everything. My father was a security guard at your company. He was crippled saving you people, and all you did was throw a little money at us and send us away. My being in this house, eating your food, using your money, I deserved it. It was payment on a debt you owed my family. This stunning, twisted revision of history left everyone speechless. I looked at him and finally understood. This wasn't just a simple case of a baby swap. This was a calculated 18-year-long campaign of parasitic revenge. Who are your parents? I asked the crucial question. Julian sneered, about to speak, but the study door was thrown open. A woman in her 50s, wearing a housekeeper's uniform, rushed into the room and threw herself in front of Julian, shielding him. It was Mrs. Diaz, the family's housekeeper of over 20 years. Don't you dare lay a hand on my son, she screamed, spreading her arms like a mother hen, her face a snarl of pure rage. The truth, in that moment, was finally and irrevocably revealed. The revelation sent the entire Sterling household into a state of paralysis. Mrs. Diaz, the woman who had worked so diligently in this house for 2 decades, was the mastermind behind the entire conspiracy. Her husband, the security guard who had been disabled in a workplace accident, was Julian's biological father. Years ago, after my mother gave birth to me, she had been weak and Mrs. Diaz was hired as the maternity nurse. She had seized an opportunity, swapping her own son for me. She then abandoned me at the door of an orphanage in a remote, rural town. She stayed on as the family's housekeeper, watching her own flesh and blood enjoy a life of privilege that was meant for me. Her husband, meanwhile, took the settlement money and lived a life of leisure and vice, constantly bleeding Mrs. Diaz and Julian for cash. For 18 years, the 3 of them had been leeches, latched onto the Sterling family, slowly draining it dry. My mother fainted on the spot. Robert Sterling seemed to age 10 years overnight. Ethan fell into a spiral of self-doubt, realizing the brother he had loved and defended was the son of his family's enemies. I was the only one left standing. I had no time to dwell on the tragedy of my own stolen childhood. There was a crisis to manage. The first thing I did was call the police. Mr. and Mrs. Diaz were guilty of kidnapping and fraud. Julian, as an accomplice, was just as culpable. The police arrived quickly and took away a wailing Mrs. Diaz, a stone-faced Julian, and his deadbeat father, whom they picked up in an illegal gambling den. For the first time, police cars were parked in the Sterling family's driveway. The scandal was too big to contain. The second thing I did was salvage the Westgate initiative. My acquaintance came through, securing me a meeting with Isabel Croft. It was held in a private tea room at an exclusive club. I went alone. Isabel was younger than I expected, dressed in an elegant but understated dress, her hair pinned up. She had an aura of cool composure. She sat behind the tea table, preparing the tea herself with fluid, graceful movements. Mr. Sterling, she said, pushing a cup toward me without any preamble. Miss Croft, I nodded, getting straight to the point. I want to once again apologize for the trouble our company's internal mismanagement has caused you. She didn't respond, only met my eyes. The saboteur has been identified and has been handed over to the authorities. As for the Westgate initiative, I hope we might have one more chance. I placed a new, bound proposal on the table between us. I had worked through the night on it. It was based on the original plan, but included several adjustments tailored to Croft Enterprises' strategic goals. I had also made significant concessions on the profit-sharing agreement. Most importantly, I had attached a business ethics and integrity pledge, formally committing our company to the highest standards of transparent and ethical conduct throughout the partnership. Isabel picked up the proposal and read it, page by page, with intense focus. The only sound in the room was the soft rustle of paper. After a long time, she set it down and looked at me. "Mr. Sterling, do you know why I agreed to see you today?" I shook my head. A small smile touched her lips, softening her cool demeanor. "Because my assistant told me that the Mr. Sterling who called was articulate, logical, and composed under pressure. He told me that in all his years, he had never heard anyone describe crisis PR as an internal review and implementation of corrective actions." A flicker of something went through me. "You're too kind, Miss Croft. Having you in the family is Robert Sterling's good fortune," she said, taking a sip of her tea. "I received the proposal. You'll have my answer within 3 days." It was a positive sign. I stood to leave. As I reached the door, she spoke again. "Jacob," I turned back. "That family code of conduct of yours is quite well written," she said, a hint of amusement in her smile. "The performance review policy is especially actionable." My heart skipped a beat. How did she know about that? When I returned home, Robert was sitting alone in the cavernous living room. The ashtray in front of him was overflowing with cigar butts. He looked up as I entered, his eyes bloodshot. "How did it go?" "Ms. Croft has the new proposal. She said she'll get back to us." He nodded, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. I knew he wasn't just worried about the project anymore. The 18 years of deceit had dealt him a devastating blow. The son he had poured all his love into was a manipulative fraud. The son he had despised and rejected had stepped up and saved the family in its moment of crisis. That kind of cognitive dissonance could shatter a man's world. "Dad," I said, walking over and pouring him a glass of water, "this is not entirely your fault." He looked up at me, his expression bewildered. "When an organization has a problem, you can't just blame the CEO," I said calmly. "The VP is responsible for a lack of oversight. Middle management is responsible for poor execution, and the ground-level staff is responsible for complacency. In our amateur hour operation, everyone had a role in the failure. Your problem was a hands-off management style that lacked effective control mechanisms. Mom's problem was allowing personal favoritism and emotion to override rational judgment. My brother's problem was a lack of professional competence and political savvy. As for Julian and his family," I paused. "They were a hostile, premeditated infiltration by an external entity." Robert stared at me as I delivered my post-mortem analysis. The look of agony on his face slowly morphed into one of utter bewilderment. "So, now isn't the time for regret," I said, placing the glass of water in his hand. "Now is the time for a deep, painful, top-to-bottom restructuring of this entire household." 3 days later, the call from Croft Enterprises came. The deal was back on. Furthermore, Isabel Croft had personally stipulated that I, Jacob Sterling, was to be the sole project lead for all communications. When the news broke, Robert sat in his study alone for the entire afternoon. That evening, he called me in. He handed me a folder. It was a stock transfer agreement. He was transferring 15% of his shares in the Sterling Corporation to me. "From now on, you're not just my son. You're the second largest shareholder in this company." He looked at me, his eyes weary, but also filled with a profound sense of relief. "This family, this company. From now on, I'm counting on you." I didn't refuse. I had earned it. I had earned my position and my compensation through merit. In the weeks that followed, I began a radical overhaul of the corporation. My first target was personnel. Using the Westgate Initiative as my vehicle, I established a special project team with myself as the director. All members were chosen based on ability alone, no connections, no last names. Several of my mother's relatives, who had been coasting in comfortable positions for years while contributing nothing, were the first to be reassigned to powerless, dead-end posts. My mother threw a fit, even showing up at the office to cause a scene. I didn't argue with her. I had security escort her out. Later, I presented her with the last 3 years of financial reports and HR files. Mom, look here. This is how much your darling nephews have cost the company. And look here. This is the evidence of their embezzlement and misuse of company funds. If you continue to protect them, this goes beyond forcing them to resign. This becomes accessory to a crime. You will be held legally responsible. Faced with the undeniable proof, my mother fell silent. My second target was process. I dismantled the old, bureaucratic approval systems and instituted a flat management structure. Responsibilities were clear, and performance metrics were transparent. If your numbers were good, you moved up. If you were dead weight, you were cut. The resistance was fierce at first. Many of the old guard refused to accept my authority. That is, until I unceremoniously fired 2 senior employees who thought their tenure made them untouchable. After that, the entire company quieted down. I reassigned Ethan to a ground-level position on the project, starting with running errands. He tried to fight it, but I shut him down with a brutally honest performance review. Ethan, your current skill set doesn't even qualify you for a junior team member role. I'm putting you on the front lines to give you a chance to learn the business from the bottom up. Think of it as management training in the trenches. When your performance metrics meet the standard, you can come back. Ethan's face went crimson as he read the report that dissected his every professional failing. But in the end, he accepted the demotion without a word. Stripped of his title and privilege, something unexpected happened. He focused, worked hard, and actually started to become competent. 1 year later, the first phase of the Westgate Initiative was completed on time and under budget. It became the real estate success story of a year. The Sterling Corporation's stock price soared. We had not only survived the crisis, but had entered a new era of growth. At the company's annual gala, I stood on stage as the CEO, delivering the year-end report. In the front row, Robert watched me, his eyes shining with pride. My mother was there, too. She had thrown herself into philanthropy and had become a softer, more thoughtful person. When she saw me, she would smile and nod. Ethan, through his own hard work, had earned the position of project director. He sat in the audience, taking meticulous notes, a new maturity and confidence in his bearing. My amateur hour operation had finally been forged into a modern, effective team that knew how to win. After the gala, I got a call from Isabel Croft. "Mr. CEO, congratulations," she said, a smile in her voice. "The credit goes to the team, Ms. Croft. Are you free tonight? We should celebrate." "I'd like that," I replied. We met at a restaurant overlooking the river. She wasn't in her usual power suit, but in a chic dress, her hair down. She looked stunning. "I've always been curious," she said as she poured me a glass of wine. "Whatever happened with your family code of conduct?" I smiled. It was fully implemented. The results have been positive. "Oh," she raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Such as?" "My father quit cigars and took up yoga. My mother stopped trying to keep up with the society wives and found her own purpose. My brother became a workaholic." "And what about you?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "Me?" I swirled the wine in my glass. "I successfully transformed my family into the model unit of the year." She laughed, a low melodic sound. "Jacob," she said, her tone suddenly serious. "I've been watching you for a year. From the way you handled your family at that party, to how you fought for your project, to how you rebuilt your entire company. I think you're the most extraordinary person I've ever met." "And so?" I asked, meeting her gaze. "So," she raised her glass to me, "I'd like to apply to join your model unit. Is there an opening?" "What position are you applying for?" I asked with a grin. "Spouse." Outside the window, the city lights glittered on the dark water. I looked at the woman across from me, and the light in her eyes was brighter than all the lights of the city. I raised my glass and gently touched it to hers. The clear, ringing sound felt like a new beginning. "Your application," I said, "is approved." When I got home later that night, I found a beautifully wrapped box on my desk. Inside was a solid gold medal. Engraved on its surface were 4 words. "Model Family Unit of the Heir below." It was the inscription, Robert Sterling. I held the heavy gold medal in my hand and couldn't help but laugh. Perfect. This team had finally graduated,